Marinaro, the Sick Podcast. What a game by the Montreal Canadiens. Haven't said that often this season, huh? It was a little bit of a rough start, but as the game went on, the Canadiens were better and better. And in the end, full marks. Very deserving 4-2 winners at home versus the Calgary Flames. Andrew Zadarnowski, Habs eyes on the prize. I would imagine you would concur.
Tony, I you know what? I enjoyed the game. The start was a little rocky, like you mentioned. Jake Allen was a little shaky at the beginning, had some problems controlling some rebounds. I was worried it was going to be another one of those games that we've seen so far this season. But he gained in confidence. The team gained in confidence. They had some, very important moments in this game, which I'm sure we're going to touch on in this podcast. And I'm just glad with the result.
Mikael Backlund, just over 2 minutes into the hockey game, puts the Calgary Flames up by a score of 1-0. And at that point, probably everyone at the Bell Center is like, here we go again. It's going to be a long night for the Habs. But Ben Sherratt, with his fourth goal of the season, midway through period number 1, he ties it at 1. What's happened with this guy? He's turned into an offensive threat over the past week.
I was going to use the same words to describe him. Look at him. He's scoring goals. He's defending big minutes with Jeff Petrie on that top pairing. You know what? Montreal needs goals from wherever they can get him. And if it comes from an unlikely person like Ben Sherratt, all the better. Because, it's a full team effort to pick him out of this slump. And Ben Sherratt is finding the back of the net. He found the back of the net in his first year with Montreal. I think last year he had a bit more of a setback in terms of offensive contribution because he was more defensive. But this year he's finding the touch, which is great because it compensates for other guys who don't have that touch yet.
Well, it's great for another reason too. His contract is up at the end of the year, and should the Montreal Canadiens want to trade him, it's not going to hurt if he can actually score some goals as well and bring his value up. It's the Sick Podcast that is brought to you by Cherry River Hard Seltzer, only 90 calories, natural flavors, no preservatives, now available in Quebec grocery stores and at the beer store. All right, so Sherratt ties it up, and then Mangiapane on a beauty gives the Flames a 2-1 lead. I know we're going to talk about the Canadiens for most of this conversation, but I have to tell you, Mangiapane, since he broke into the National Hockey League, he's growing as a player, and every time I see him, he impresses me more and more and more.
Well, I can't say I've watched a lot of Calgary Flames games, so I'm not that familiar with the name. However, the play itself, the goal that he scored was a gorgeous goal. To receive and control it on the backhand, off balance as he's being tackled by, I forget who he's being tackled by, and then to flip it over Jake Allen's shoulder. That takes talent to do that kind of controlled move. And that goal was a beauty and well-deserved for him.
All right, so the Calgary Flames are up by a score of 2-1 after one period of play, and the Montreal Canadiens go on the power play. They do so midway through period number 2, and there's a loose puck, and guess who jumps on it? Yeah, Brendan Gallagher, who ties the game at 2. He got whacked by Eric Goodbranson right after the goal went in, who cross-checked him from behind. I thought that was really cheap, man.
It was a late hit. It wasn't clean. I mean, obviously there was a lot of frustration there. Goodbranson is the kind of defender that's got plays with an edge. And I'm sure Gallagher is the type of player that greatly annoys those kind of players. So, there was hits going back and forth all game. There was a lot of slashing. There was a lot of conversations during and post play. So, yes, you know what? But I think that kind of physical play woke up the Montreal Canadiens. I think that's what they were missing. They were missing sort of emotion in their games. There was frustration in their games thus far this season.
Yeah,
to see this kind of fiery emotion coming out of them. That I think was very good. And if you need to come out of a game with some bruises and some couple of pains here and there, just to rekindle that fire, I think it's a good thing because Brendan Gallagher is a good Brendan Gallagher.
Andrew, you're right. Listen, for one of the rare times this season, they look like a team versus the Calgary Flames. They look like everyone was fighting for each other. They worked really hard. Anyway, Gallagher gets hit from behind by Goodbranson. Toffoli hits Goodbranson from behind, telling him, you know what, I didn't appreciate what you did to my teammate. And then Tanev drops his gloves, gets in 2 shots into Weidman's face, and he's not penalized. I couldn't believe what I was watching.
Yeah, I mean, every game you're going to have some kind of subjective differences with the refereeing, and we've seen it. I think it's part of the game that referees kind of pick and choose how they wish to penalize players given a situation, given the players involved, given the time of game. There's enough statistical evidence out there that penalty calls vary depending on the point of the game, the pace of the game, and the score of the game. So it is what it is. It's a nature of the beast. Should a player objectively be penalized for punching another player in the face? Sure, but it's hockey, so we know that it's not always the case.
Speaking of stats, 4-2 was the score for the Canadiens. They outshot the Calgary Flames 28-26. The Canadiens won 54% of the draws to only 46% for Calgary. The Canadiens were 2 for 5 on the power play. Meanwhile, Calgary only had one power play opportunity in the game and went 0 for 1. Nick Suzuki, we'll talk about him in just a second, leading the charge, 1 goal and 1 assist. Mike Hoffman had 5 shots on goal, so there's some stats for you. If any of those players that I brought up, whether it was Suzuki or whether it was Hoffman or any player in the National Hockey League or any team, any sport for that matter, you want to pick up a jersey, sportbuffshop.com for all your officially licensed sports apparel and our sick merchandise as well. Use code SICK15 for 15% off on all of their items. Speaking of Suzuki, it's there's at the 12-minute mark or so of period number 3, this guy's coming down the right wing, which we've seen him do on many occasions thus far this season. Comes down the right wing, goes wide, gains a little bit of speed, and he sees that the goalie is off his line. The goalie is out of his crease. The goalie looks like he's a little bit off balance. And, of course, I'm talking about Jacob Markstrom. And what does Suzuki do as soon as he sees the goalie's out? He intentionally throws the puck back in front to try and bank it off the goalie. And it worked. And he scored. What a goal of genius.
It shows the kind of patience and intelligence that Nick Suzuki brings to the Montreal Canadiens. And to almost Jedi mind trick the puck into the net to bank it off the goalie is incredible. But let's rewind it a couple of minutes earlier when Nick Suzuki essentially tried the same play and Jacob Markstrom snagged the puck with his glove, looked back at him and said, "That's not going to work." Now, if you were a lesser player, you probably would be scared to try that same play again because you just got told it's not going to work. But not Nick Suzuki. Nick Suzuki said, "I'm going to go for it because I see an opening. I see a weakness on this goalie." Nick Suzuki identified a spot where he can find a vulnerable Jacob Markstrom, and he essentially tried the exact same move out of the exact same spot that didn't work earlier, but this time it did work. And that's the sign of a player who's playing with confidence, who sees the game, who sees things a little bit better and above and beyond your average player.
He's got 14 points in 15 games now. Watching the game on television, I saw a stat, and I'm trying to remember if it's October 26th or October 28th. Anyway, he's got 9 points now, I believe, in his last 5 games. And since that date in late October, Nick Suzuki, I believe, has the second most points of any player in the National Hockey League, 1 point behind Leon Draisaitl. Isn't that something?
That's a stat that's quite interesting. I'll look it up after the podcast here, just out of sheer curiosity, because that's definitely something to brag about. There's been so much negative commentary about the Montreal Canadiens season thus far, and so many fans saying the team should just give up after the first 10 games. To have a positive stat like that, it's always nice to introduce some positive information into the media flow.
Well, not to mention, let's face it, Marc Bergevin goes out and gives him that 8-year, $63 million contract after just a couple of seasons in the National Hockey League, and he's 22 years old, and there's a lot of people saying, why didn't he give him the bridge? At one point, I thought, why didn't he give him the bridge either? But let's, if this is Suzuki, and by the way, his prime is going to be like 4 years from now. He's going to end up being a pretty special player because he's the best player in the Montreal Canadiens. And Andrew, with all due respect to his teammates, It's not even close.
He's a special player, and we kind of understand why Marc Bergevin skipped the bridge deal. Marc Bergevin doesn't skip the bridge deal a whole lot. That's a very rare move for him, and I can only think of one other player that he did that with, and that's Brendan Gallagher. And I think Brendan Gallagher is also, you can put him in that special player category. So for Nick Suzuki to come out and prove Marc Bergevin right, it just hits all the right notes.
A goal and an assist for Brendan Gallagher, a goal and an assist for Nick Suzuki, a goal for Ben Sherratt, and with the Canadiens up by a score of 3-2 with 6 seconds left in regulation, Jake Evans is able to pot one home. And I got to tell you, we talked about players who are growing. Evans, we saw some flashes last year that this guy could be a pretty good player. The big question mark for Evans is staying healthy, because at one point he had 4 documented concussions in a span of 2 years and 9 months. And those are the injuries you don't want to have, obviously not. He had a couple of injuries this year. He missed a couple of games, but ever since this guy's been back in the lineup, I know he was a victim of Kempe's game-winning goal last game, but let's not forget, that game doesn't get to overtime if Evans doesn't pull a little bit of magic on Bjornfoot, turning him inside out, and a quick wrist shot to the top of the net. He scores again tonight, and I'm happy he scored because he played really hard and he played really well. And he deserved that. He played 16 minutes and 24 seconds. He was 50% in the circle. He had 4 hits in the hockey game. Andrew, he deserved it.
Absolutely. Jake Evans is one of those kind of, let's call it a rare gem for the Montreal Canadiens organization, where you have a player come up through the development system and actually stick in the team, stick on the Montreal Canadiens, and actually make an impact. I think, there's definitely a lot of conversation around Montreal's ability to develop players. And we've seen a lot of players come up with a lot of high expectations that tend to fizzle out. You're thinking about Jacob Delarose, Charles Hudon, who else was there? Sven Andrighetto, players that were coming up with a lot of momentum and a lot of talk behind them that fizzled out with the Montreal Canadiens. Sherback. Well, Sherback never really actually made it on the Montreal Canadiens, to be fair. But here you have Jake Evans, a 7th round pick that spends 2 years in the AHL, if not 3 years, gradually getting better year over year. And when he gets that opportunity to play in the NHL, he ends up sticking in the NHL, and not just sticking in the NHL. He plays at such a level that it made almost Ryan Poehling redundant, or at the very least give Ryan Poehling more time to develop in the AHL, and they don't have to worry about rushing him to the NHL. So Jake Evans has more than proven his worth, and I think he's no longer even a 4th line center for Montreal. At this point, he's definitely made a case for himself as moving up into the 3rd line position, and even on certain occasions when they need it, a shutdown on the top 6.
It was a gutsy performance by the Canadiens, who were without Jonathan Drouin, of course, who is still suffering from headaches. Dvorak and Anderson have not been at 100%. Anderson's been under the weather. Dvorak had a therapy day. There's an injury plaguing him. Nevertheless, Dvorak played over 16 minutes. Anderson played 8 seconds shy of 16 minutes in the hockey game. You brought up Ryan Poehling's name. I've been tough on him, but I think fair. And the one thing I've always questioned was just overall work ethic and care level and doing the little things and playing hard from your first shift to your last shift. Tonight, I tip my hat because I really liked the way Ryan Poehling played. I know he didn't play a lot, 8 minutes and 12 seconds. We didn't expect him to get a lot of ice time playing in between Belzil on his right and Pezzetta on his left. Belzil played just over 6 minutes. Pezzetta played a second shy of 7 minutes. But I thought Poehling worked really hard, as if every shift was his last one in the National Hockey League. And if this guy wants to be an effective NHLer, he's going to have to do that all the time. So tonight, for the first time since he scored 3 goals in his first NHL regular season game a couple of years ago, he looked like an NHLer, and he didn't have to score. It's just he worked hard, his positioning, he was solid, he was reliable. He looked like an NHLer, 71% in the circle as well.
Exactly, and that's the big contribution that he can immediately bring to the team is face-off wins. We know that Montreal has had problems over the years with having multiple centers who can win face-offs. And if that's what he brings on a night in, night out basis at a minimum, then he may secure his spot. Right off the bat, he's doing better than, let's say, Cedric Paquette in the face-off circle. And I think the role he was asked to play be kind of tonight, at least with Belzile and Pezzetta, to be kind of the disturbing line, I think they did quite well. We know Michael Pezzetta is capable of ruffling a few feathers here and there.
Yeah.
But Ryan Palin was in those scrums. He wasn't shying away from a bit of a physical contribution to that scrum. And that's what I think one of the knocks against him was that he wouldn't get too physical. He wouldn't get too physical battling for the pucks in the corners. He wouldn't get too physical in the after the whistle. But I think we saw more of that from him in this game. And that's an excellent kind of sign for the future. Now, once injured players start coming back, it'll be very interesting to see the send down order back to Laval. We'll see what he does. This is game one. Excellent start for him. Hopefully he can keep up on this pace.
Once again, watching the game on RDS, at one point late in that hockey game, they had showed that he had on one-on-one battles, he had won 4 of them, which at that point late in the game was more than any Montreal Canadian in the hockey game. So real positive contribution from him. One of those rare games thus far this season at the Bell Center where it was not a 60-minute effort, all right, because there were some lapses in the first period, but it was pretty much as close to a complete game that the Canadians have played this season, where they worked really hard versus an opponent who lost their last game, yes, but before that had a record of 7-0-3 in a 10-game span. So that's a pretty good hockey team who are starting their first game of a 7-game road trip to Calgary Flames. They wanted to start off on the right foot. They weren't able to. And on Friday night, they play the Leafs in Toronto. Andrew, do the Canadians win or lose in Detroit? And I ask you because if they win, it'll be the first time this season that they would have won 2 consecutive hockey games.
I think we're seeing an improvement in their overall play, in their overall demeanor. That's like 3 games now where it is an improvement game over game. I think they're managing to play the kind of system that Dominic Ducharme wants them to play. I think they're starting to play confidently within that system. And yes, you're right. It wasn't a full 60-minute effort just yet. And if they're at home have a fourth line that's playing 6 to 8 minutes, on the road, that's going to be even less. So to me, that tells me that they don't necessarily trust that fourth line at home. Will they trust them with first change on the road? Probably not. I think they're going to be up against it in Detroit. Will they win? I think they have momentum behind them, but Detroit's a very, very talented team. And if Montreal can't put in a full 60-minute effort, it's going to be hard for them. I want to say, yes, they'll win, but I'm not quite convinced that they're out of the slump yet.
They do have Detroit's number this season for a change. Andrew, thanks for doing this. We'll talk soon, man. It's now time for me to make some money.
It's time for Sick Picks. Brought to you by MyBookie.
3-game parlay. Place your bets on MyBookie. Go to mybookie.ag/the Sick Podcast and use code SickPicks to double your deposit. Bet, win, get paid. I got a 3-game parlay. You ready? The Edmonton Oilers scored 5 goals in Boston on Thursday night. On Friday night, they're going to be in Buffalo. I'm not going to bet an under in an Oiler game, again, the way McDavid and Draisaitl are going. So give me goals in that hockey game and give me the over. As for the Philadelphia Flyers, they're going to be in Carolina. Give me the Hurricanes to win that one. And the Washington Capitals, who played on Thursday night, Zach Fucale won by a score of 2-0. A shutout win for him over Detroit. They play in Columbus versus the Blue Jackets. Give me the Blue Jackets. So once again, my 3-game parlay. Columbus Blue Jackets, Carolina Hurricanes, and the over in the game between the Oilers and the Sabres. I'm putting 2 units on it. I'm Marinero, the Sick Podcast. Until next time.